Hello. Today I'm going to show you an example of, well, technically a third and fourth stitch and slip stitch crochet. It is called inverse back or inverse front, depending on which loop you're working through. But as you can see, I've made a washcloth right here. I've done the edges kind of garter style, but in the center part here, here's where I've used an inverse back stitch. And when you flip it over, see? It's very similar to the way knit stockinette stitch behaves. I've seen this stitch called flat stitch, and I'd have to agree with it because it produces a nice flat surface, but you can see you could achieve quite a bit of drape with this stitch. Now inverse stitch is a little bit stranger to work with. I'm going to move this out of the way because you have to move your yarn and your work in a different way. Now if you're familiar with knitting, you're going to do the same thing as you would when you make a purl stitch. You're just going to do it in crochet. So instead of the yarn being towards the back of the work like I'm sure most of you are used to, you're going to bring your yarn towards the front, and you're going to, depending on which loop you're working into, you're going to invert your hook and go from back to front as opposed to front to back like you normally would. So we will just work an inverse back because that's the stitch I was working on my washcloth, which I will have a pattern up for soon. Please watch for that. So you enter the back loop from front to back, pointing towards yourself, yarn over, and slip through both those stitches. And this is one that you have to watch your tension on because it's pretty easy to get really tight on this stitch, just because it's slightly awkward until you get used to it. So once again, get the back loop, insert your hook back to front, yarn over, pull through both. And you just keep doing this across the row. Pull out some more yarn first. And it just helps to keep a nice loose hold on your yarn while you're doing this. If you've got a really tight tension, go up a hook. If you've got a really loose hand, this might be a little bit easier for you. I know I usually crochet with a pretty loose hand, so I am usually not too terribly tight on this. Now, if you want to make that flat stitch, you're going to alternate this inverse back whenever you're on the wrong side of your work. When you're on the right side, you would switch and do front loop only, making that flat stitch. Do you see how that's coming together? And if you want to use this on the right side, if you want this inverse stitch to show on the front side so it looks like purl row, you would do an inverse front. So same thing. I gotta drop my yarn there. But front to back, or excuse me, back to front in through the front loop. See, this is very tricky when you're first getting used to it and when you're first making YouTube videos of it. Back to front. See, a little bit tight there. So like I said, big hooks and a loose hand when you're first learning how to do this go a long way towards making things easier on you. But do you see? starting to match this bottom row here, a flat stitch, and then another garter look. They're kind of a pain until you get used to doing them, but they're essential to know when you're doing slip stitch crochet. Back to front, just keep remembering that. And yarn in front of your work. There we are. And that's how you do an inverse back or an inverse front stitch.